It's quite easy to feel motivated to get a good pump at the gym when you've had a scoop of pre-workout and you're listening to your favorite motivational music. You're just feeling it, totally in the mood and on top of the world. For some, it's a ritual they look forward to and even make great lengths to refuse working out if these prerequisites aren't met. I'm guilty of it myself. But what if I told you you're doing your brain and body a disservice whenever you pair your workout with such stimulants? If you didn't know already, dopamine is the main driver behind motivation, mood, desire, and willingness to push through to seek activities that we find pleasurable. At a primal level, our ancestors developed dopamine as a way of survival and reproduction. The common misconception stands that it's only released when we seek such activities. That's just simply not the case. Actually, dopamine exists in our bodies at a baseline level, and moments we find pleasurable are directly correlated to peaks above its baseline. When you're at baseline, it means you haven't engaged in any activities that have caused a release of dopamine. And what your body does is it produces enough dopamine and stores it in your brain, readily available at any moment's notice. Once this readily available dopamine is released, you peak, the reason behind the feeling of satisfaction. Actually, moments after peaking, your baseline slings back lower than your normal baseline. Why, do you ask? Why wouldn't it return back to its normal baseline? Well, the way dopamine works is that it takes time for your body to produce dopamine. When you're riding at baseline and suddenly engage in dopamine releasing activities, your dopamine stores get depleted. How much they get depleted depends on how pleasurable you found that activity. More dopamine depletion means a higher peak. But with a higher peak also comes a bigger drop and a higher deviation from the baseline. These drops take time to recover, and it's this detail many people just don't know about. I'll give an example. Suppose you had a high-fat, high-calorie meal at a burger joint. It's a burger joint you've never been to and decide to give it a try. Suppose while having the meal, you have mixed feelings, not super ecstatic, but satisfied. Now suppose you have a meal at your favorite burger joint. You're through the moon. After the meal at your favorite burger joint, you're going to experience a greater drop in your baseline, even though they were both high-fat, high-calorie meals. This isn't the problem though, because everyone deserves a delicious meal from their favorite restaurant every once in a while. The problem comes when you start stacking pleasurable experience one after another, in this case, unhealthy high-calorie meals. Continuing to deplete your dopamine with consecutive indulgent behaviors will cause you to experience diminishing returns or even no effect at all, otherwise known as addiction. Addiction is a progressive narrowing of the activities that bring pleasure until it becomes a sole activity, such as eating delicious food. Addicts constantly pursuing the same activity without giving the body enough time to recover results in the baseline sinking lower and lower. As a result, the resting baseline will also lower over time until the addicts fail to feel any pleasure at all and drop into a serious depression, which can lead to life-threatening situations such as suicide. With this in mind, let's get back to the workout with music and pre-workout. From our understanding of dopamine baselines and peaks, you're essentially jacking up your dopamine baseline before you even step in the gym. By the time you finished your workout, you're at an extreme dopamine peak relative if you would have just worked out without music and pre-workout. You're in essence raising the requirements needed to reach the same level of dopamine release again. Over time, as your body gets exposed to this level of overstimulation, your resting baseline will also drop over time. Very imperceptible month to month, but over the span of several years, this can lead to the feeling of not getting the same stimulation as when you first started working out. What used to work will just simply not work anymore. The key is to maintain a high level dopamine baseline as it will drive the evolution of your life progression. To achieve this, you need to practice intermittent release of dopamine by not expecting or chasing high levels of dopamine every time you engage in these activities, such as working out. The intermittent release can be compared to activities such as gambling, a sports game, or grades in school. Let's take a sports game for example. Every time you go out and play, you don't know what the outcome will be. Sometimes you'll win and it'll trigger a substantial amount of dopamine, but other times you'll lose, which will release a very minimal amount. Or other times it'll end in a tie, which will trigger a somewhat medium response. What we want to do is apply this sporadic release of dopamine to activities we are fond of. So for working out, let's say 5 out of the 7 days of the week, you go without pre-workout and music. One day of the week you go with music, and the last day you do all three and trigger a massive peak. But remember, you shouldn't be triggering high peaks in dopamine unless you are completely fine with withstanding the inevitable crash that will follow and waiting out the period for your dopamine baseline to return to normal. Because your ability to experience motivation and pleasure for what happens next is directly correlated to how great your prior dopamine peak was and how much time has elapsed. As a closing remark, if you don't really know how to forego making activities random in terms of dopamine release, it can be as simple as flipping a coin. Let's say 5 out of the 7 days you work out with no aids. In the last 2 days, you flip a coin to see if you will use workout aids or not. Feel free to experiment with other facets of your life as well, such as cheat meals or any other activity. As you incorporate a mindset of pursuing the challenging activities without external stimulants, you will begin to cultivate an appreciation for the struggle. This will in effect lead to developing a growth mindset that strives for rewards as a direct result of persistent effort and taking action. It's quite hard to do since you have to practice a level of positive self-talk that will reaffirm that the action you are doing is worth it, even if you are feeling tired, fatigued, or miserable. Over time, your brain will begin to believe your positive self-talk and in the process foster healthy dopamine baselines and peaks. If you found this video helpful, please like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications, and I'll see you on the next one.